move out of the gallery and into our everyday lives. It's so strong, so reproducible, that it appears everywhere. With Andy Warhol, high art became a brand. His art about modern consumer culture had become part of it. Like an in vogue fashion label, Warhol and his brand can still stamp cool onto anything. Even this pool in a boutique hotel. And the cover of Madonna's 2009 Greatest Hits album, Celebration. But what is it about Andy's images that makes them so popular today? I've come to ad agency McCann Erickson to ask Faris Jacob.
What I really want to know is, why am I wearing a T-shirt printed with Andy Warhol's face nearly 50 years after he was making this kind of imagery?
He was brilliant at branding. He was very consciously using some of the sort of tricks and strategies of advertising, but it feels like he was much more intuitive about it. It was much more a natural thing. I think he was really ahead of his time in looking at how, you know, endlessly replicating your own image changes how people see you and stuff. And Facebook is an obvious example. So the idea of personal branding kind of used to make me feel a bit nauseous, because it's like, it seems very artificial. But now everybody is putting pictures of themselves online and expressing themselves on Twitter and Facebook and lots of different platforms. And so inevitably, whether or not you think you're creating a brand, you are creating a brand. But now, I mean, people take Warhol's image in vain all the time. Actually, within the Mac's installed applications, there's a way to Warholize yourself.
Right.
And again...
What does it involve?
Well, I'll grab a picture of you and I will show you. So we'll take a picture.
Oh, wow. Oh, look.
So we can just... We can create a Warhol image right now. Okay, you ready?
Yeah. Okay, I think
right, go.
Shall I do a little...
Do an Andy finger.
Great. I've seen lots of these on Facebook. It's almost become more popular than putting up your own image. It's as if it gives you instant credibility and cool.
It's appropriating cool from Andy.
People first started trying to appropriate Andy's cool in the 1960s. Then, a growing celebrity-hungry entourage began hanging out at his silver foil-covered studio, The Factory. This was more than just a place where Andy made art. It became the high temple of New York's wild underground scene. Outside was still a world of men in suits, ladies in pretty dresses, cocktail parties, and polite restraint. While at The Factory, the swinging 60s were being created. Freaks hung out with Hollywood stars like Jane Fonda in an outrageous, drug-fueled, gender-bending circus, and Andy Warhol would watch. Today, some survivors from the Silver Factory years, like Gerard Malanga, still get together. Billy Name is another veteran from those drug-crazed days, who famously locked himself in a storeroom for a year.
Later on, I get the impression at the factory that it wasn't always a happy place, that sometimes it was quite, there were difficult days,
there was drama that went on, but it's no different from in your own family, you know.
But if it was like a family, what role do you think Andy played? Because it strikes me as not very much like a dad.
Well, it was more like a family on a TV show, so everyone was a character. So Andy would have been the wizard, the magician, the magnetic center.
Is there anything here?
Camera's already rolling.
Is he here?
No.
In the summer of 1963, Andy bought his first handheld movie camera and started shooting films. And not long afterwards, he made his first screen tests. 3-minute film portraits of factory regulars and beautiful and famous visitors. People like Dennis Hopper, Bob Dylan, Salvador Dali, everyone who was anyone in the early 60s in New York. The only thing that Andy would tell them was to stare directly at the camera. Whatever else they did was up to them.
The screen tests were like moving portraits. Using film to make art was another important leap that Andy made, a further break from traditional art.
Now, Susan, smile. Say cheese. Can we do a cheese movie? All you have to do is say cheese, cheese. All right. No, the next 3 minutes could be a cheese movie. All right?
Here, Warhol's filming the writer and activist, Susan Sontag.
You don't have to do anything. Just what you
Billy Name remembers exactly how Andy would stage his screen tests.
Well, if you want a real Andy Warhol screen test, there's a specific setup.
This feels like an interrogation.
Well, it's sort of like Andy Warhol S&M, yeah.
Yeah, right. It's a bit sadistic.
All right, and let's take a look at that lighting. Oh, see, that's
God, it's
perfect.
kind of bright. I mean,
Well, it's only going to be what? How many minutes is it? 3 minutes?
it's the anarchist.
And the ones that mother gives you.
3 minutes feels like hours. Sitting with that black eye boring into you. You feel incredibly self-conscious and exposed. It's like a condensed version of Big Brother. The unwavering, penetrating gaze of the camera stripping off the mask to reveal the real person underneath. The first voyeuristic reality TV. I'd like to know why so many people chose to put themselves through this for Andy. So I'm on my way to meet the interior designer, Nicky Haslam, who's a celebrity in his own right. And he knew Andy back in the 60s and often visited the Silver Factory. And I'm hoping that he's going to be able to paint a picture of what the scene at the time was all about.
Hi, Al.
Nicky.
Welcome.
Hello. Good to meet you.
How are you?
I'm very well.
Come in,
Thank
quick.
you. This place looks ridiculously lavish and grand. God.
Yes, it would have been a good place to entertain Andy when he was in London.
I bet he would have loved this. So you went along to the famous factory, Silver
Well,
Factory.
actually, yes, I did. I went to the Silver Factory quite often.
What was he like in those days?
He did have that sort of aura that conferred a kind of genuine happiness onto you that made you feel famous for 15 minutes.
Oh, this is so glamorous.
It was like being sort of touched by the god of fame.
You don't have to do anything.
Do you think he was a real voyeur?
I'm sure he was a boy, yes, in every sense of the word. He was kind of like outside himself looking in. And he didn't necessarily want to be the centre of things. He wanted to watch and see other people's reactions and how other people lived their life. He was oddly shockable, Andy.
He was shockable.
Yeah, but he loved being shocked, that's the point.
As well as the screen tests, he started making other films about the most boring aspects of human life, like people sleeping.
Your first major picture was called Sleep, and I believe it was 8 hours straight filming of a man asleep.
Yeah, it was John Giorno. He's a sort of a telephone poet in New York now.
Why did you decide to just shoot somebody sleeping for 8 hours?
Well, he just said that he sleeps so soundly, and you could just put, he falls asleep, and he left his door open in New York, which is so strange, because he just left his front door open. You could just walk right in.
Maybe you think it's a bit crass, but when I sort of think of people watching 24-hour coverage of the Big Brother house and seeing people asleep, I sort of think that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Andy Warhol making Sleep in the early 60s.
Well, it's probably true to say there is a very, very strong link, and Andy's sort of genius was for making the banal and the trivial interesting. All the films that he made, they've become kind of the footprint of reality TV in a sense.
Was that his gift? He could draw out the superstar in all of us?
Yes, I think that you've put your finger on it. I think he thought everybody had a point, and everybody had a superstar. Somewhere in everybody was a superstar quality that he could mine and make interesting.
So Andy Warhol realised that with enough exposure, anybody could be a celebrity.
Before anyone else, Andy saw what was coming. A new global phenomenon of celebrity like it had never been before. He coined the term superstar.
Well, it's all part of it. I have my whole brand and I have a business, so the more attention, the better.
Andy's prophecy was that there'd be a new kind of person, he instinctively realised that anyone who could find a way to get in front of a camera would automatically become a celebrity. He looked into the future and saw not only Paris Hilton, but Jade Goody and Susan Boyle.
I've broken the mirror. Correct. I'd like to try and look intelligent at times.
Now, she's a middle-aged volunteer church worker from Blackburn in Scotland.
Andy discovered that he could manufacture celebrity, and his experiments in film proved that he no longer had to restrict himself to paintings.
In 1965, Andy had announced that he was going to leave painting behind him altogether and concentrate on a whole raft of different projects. And in the same year, he began to manage Lou Reed and John Cale's band, The Velvet Underground. And this is the classic banana record sleeve that he designed for their album The Velvet Underground and Nico, which was released in 1967.
As producer for The Velvet Underground, Andy said he wanted to create the biggest discotheque in the world, combining music, film and performance. The band played with his movies projected onto walls and his beautiful entourage dancing. Encouraging them to let go and experiment with their sound, Warhol created a blueprint for a new style of multimedia music performance. Up to now, most bands had looked a bit like this. But the Velvet Underground inspired musicians like David Bowie to really let loose with wild and outlandish performances. Bowie paid tribute in his song Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol looks a scream, have him on my wall. Andy Warhol, silver scream, can't tell them apart.
Some people claim that the Velvet Underground were almost as influential as the Beatles. And of course, it wasn't just Bowie who was inspired by them, and he was obsessed with Warhol. You could say that the whole punk rock movement that